Welcome to the Dynasty Pros Devy Show. Alongside SC Romero and Justin Taylor, I'm Tommy Harvey. Tonight we'll dive into our Devy wide receiver rankings and discuss a few sleepers. All that coming up now. Hey guys, before we get started, do us a favor, hit the thumbs up and subscribe. If you'd like to know when we go live, make sure you also hit that notification bell. Let's just jump right into it, guys. We're going to go our overall top five first, get a little bit into that, and then we'll go by class. Kind of the same thing we've been doing over the last couple shows with our quarterbacks and running backs. Tonight we got wide receivers. I'll start it off. I think the unanimous consensus number one is Marvin Harrison Jr. out of Ohio State. I've got his teammate Emeka Egbuka number two. Number three, I got Xavier Worthy out of Texas. 4, I've got Luther Burden out of Missouri, and number 5 is the guy we're going to spotlight a little bit later on. I've got Malik Nabers coming in at number 5 from LSU. I think these 5 have tons of talent. There's obviously several other guys we could throw in there. Matter of fact, I know a couple. I know you guys have a couple other guys in there. I think we're all pretty unanimous with Marvin Harrison Jr. going number 1, though.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr. I think we're just all ready to see this star-studded season for him, just to go out there and just showcase why he's going to be the first receiver off the board in the NFL draft next year, assuming he does come out. And then so I actually have Troy Franklin from Oregon as my number 2 wide receiver and Emeka Egbuka as number 3. And I actually went a little bit further. I went to my top wide receiver in my 25 class and 26 class, number 4 being Antonio Williams from Clemson, and the number 5 being Brandon Ennis, who's also at Ohio State. So I gave the Ohio State's breathers, but I mean, that's wide receiver you, man. So
absolutely,
wide receiver there. You'll
absolutely it is. They probably got 5, 6, 7 guys who you could throw in any Devy top 15, 20 wide receivers and just go from there.
Heartline's doing something special there.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I'll jump in with my overall top 5 rankings too. Marvin Harrison Jr., obviously the top guy. I've got Egbuka as my number 2. I just think that Ohio State pair is just studly. I think they're both going to go super high in the draft next year. I'm actually got Luther Burden up there at number 3 overall. For me, Burden is just a guy that you saw it last year, the glimpses, but I think you're going to get a better offense with a better QB play this year from Missouri, and I think he's going to have just a huge coming out party as kind of their main weapon that they focus on this next year, so I'm expecting big things out of him. Evan Stewart down there at Texas A&M, same class as Burden. I just love him, and I just think a guy that's going to be sneaky good if he can keep himself out of trouble and perform. I really do like Malik Nabers in this upcoming draft. He's a guy that has kind of sneakily in some Devy circles is kind of moving up. He's a guy that maybe didn't get taken in Devy leagues last year, and he's one of those guys sitting out there. If you're in a Devy draft coming up, that there's a good chance he might be available. If he is, he's a guy I'm going after for sure in my top 5 overall as far as what could happen next year. Because with a good season, I think he could get himself possibly into that top first round NFL mix next year.
Absolutely. I know a lot of people have kind of been a little down on Xavier Worthy based off last season, but it actually came out that he played a lot of last season with I believe a broken hand. So, him having a bit of the dropsies is a little bit understandable whenever he's out there with that type of injury. I think this year he's in for a big season. Quinn Ewers is back healthy. They have tons of weapons there. Their backfield is ridiculous with Jaden Blue and with Cedric Baxter and even Jonathan Brooks. Their wide receiver core is nuts. Their tight end is one of the best in the country. I just think Xavier Worthy is going to have a lot of open field to run in.
Yeah, he's
I've been down just a little bit on Worthy coming season just for the size and some things. I've just been down just a hair on him. But he's one of those guys, he would jump back up for me if the Texas offense can pull it together this year. Ewers has a whole year with him. I could see him being that guy people are a little down on just because he didn't quite have the year people were expecting last year. But I could see that, flipping a switch quick and people are right back on top of him as the top 5 guy. But I still have him as a top 5 guy in this class for me as far as the guys coming out. I have him at number 5 on my list, right behind Nabers and Franklin. But he's definitely a guy still got my top 5. There's just a few of those other guys in those other classes that are kind of just snuck ahead of him for me as far as Devy purposes go.
And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I think there's probably 10 guys, maybe more than that, who you could kind of shuffle in and out of a lot of these different positions and rankings.
Yeah, I think Worthy, same thing. He's my 5 right now in that class. But it's just the size. I think he's right now, from what I'm looking at, he's measuring in like under 160. So I definitely want him to gain some weight there. He could definitely rise. He's a quick and aggressive runner. He can catch the ball, a quarterback's best friend because he knows how to get open. So definitely someone that's you want to keep an eye on because I definitely think he can be the wide receiver 1 for his team, and he'll easily climb the ranks. For a pro level, I just worry about that size. So that will be, if I don't see he gains any bit, that will definitely drop him on my boards. But the talent's there for him.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people had an issue with Devontae Smith's weight as well, but he's actually proven to be very solid in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
Wide receiver is just, in my opinion, is the deepest position in Devy rankings. There's so many wide receivers. I actually have a 50 player ranking per position, and at wide receiver, it was so hard getting, it was so hard to not put some of these guys in my top 50, and that just shows how deep that position is. There's guys like I only think I have like Jordan Hudson in my top 50, and he's in most people's top 30. But it's just so hard to get some of these guys in there that it's so deep. Let's go ahead and move on to our 2024 guys here. I've got Marvin Harrison Jr., obviously. Emeka Egbuka is my number 2. Xavier Worthy is my 3. Malik Nabers is my 4. And then I'll go with Mario Williams as my number 5 out of Southern Cal. He's extremely talented. I think it's just about him getting the opportunities there, which he hasn't really had. But I think with Jordan Addison moving on, I really think he may be the 1B to maybe Dorian Singer's 1A at Southern Cal this year.
Yeah, my top 5, the unanimous one, I think, is Marvin Harrison.
Right.
I do have Tony Franklin as my 2, and then Egbuka as my 3. I have Brendan Rice, going into USC. He definitely transferred there. And, same thing with Marvin Harrison. It's just that legacy prospect, son of Jerry Rice. And really, if you watch him on tape, Jerry Rice is arguably the greatest to ever play the game, right, at that position. But, man, this kid is nice. And he's about to go in there with arguably the best quarterback in the nation next year with Caleb Williams. Definitely an opportunity there. He is bigger size than Mario Williams. I honestly did have Mario Williams there, and then I said, wait, hold on. This kid's here. So now I want to see this. And I'm excited to see that matchup with Caleb and Brendan. And we could possibly see just a phenomenal season, just an even better season, because now he has a huge threat with Brendan Rice there. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Xavier Worthy is my number 5 as well.
Well, that receiving core at Southern Cal is just so loaded. You look at Dorian Singer and Mario Williams and Brendan Rice, and then you also have those 2 big-time freshmen coming in, Mekhi Lemon and Zachariah Branch. Those guys are going to be special too.
100%.
Yeah, it feels like Ohio State and USC are kind of mirroring each other here. Great quarterback play the last couple years. Great guys coming up through the ranks in the quarterback play, and then just stud receiver after stud receiver. And that's the thing is, you don't know about USC. I mean, which one of these guys is going to be the guy that ends up becoming the number one for them? It could easily be Mario Williams. It could be one of the freshmen. It could be Rice. I mean, the ball's going to get spread around all over there. So obviously I'd want those guys anywhere I can get them, just like you want with the Ohio State guys, because you never know. I mean, Marvin Harrison busted out a year earlier than people expected him to, and that was partly because of the injury to JSN. And so you could get that same situation at Texas, same situation at USC, where one of these main guys goes down, and all of a sudden another guy steps up and all of a sudden has a gigantic year that you thought maybe he was a year or two away, and all of a sudden you were talking about one of these guys being the number one wide receiver prospect going into next season. So I think you always want to go with talent, especially at schools that seem to be bringing in that talent. And I always think, just as a player, when you're around other really good players, that can't do anything but benefit you. You know, running routes with those guys every day, seeing how they do things, working together, seeing how other guys are getting open, just bouncing ideas off each other, that can do nothing but help you.
Doesn't hurt to have a big-time quarterback either.
Huh. Yeah, Heisman Trophy winner. It definitely helps, and guys that are on the list. That definitely makes things a lot easier as a wide receiver. That is for sure.
Absolutely.
I'll jump in real quick just on my rankings, what I had for this group for 2024. Marvin Harrison Jr., Ohio State, obviously one. Ibuka, number 2 from Ohio State. I got Nabers as my third guy. I just think he has a chance to really shoot up boards. Like I said, Xavier Worthy, for me right now is 4. I'd like to see him gain some size, but I think he has a chance to have a breakout year at Texas. Then I actually had Franklin from Oregon in there as my 5th guy. And I was really kind of debating that. I really like Franklin a lot, but a guy I was really having to fight not to get in that top 5 was number 1 was Mario Williams. But a guy I love, Dominic Levet from Missouri, who transferred to Georgia this year. If he can go to Georgia and be the number 1 there, which I think he's got that ability. Like I said, he was the number 1 SEC wide receiver as far as yardage and receptions for a good part of last season, and with not very good QB play at Mizzou. So if you can get him in Georgia, I don't know who wins that job, if it's Carson Beck or if it's Vandergraff, but if Beck wins that job, I could see all of a sudden Levet on the national stage, people starting to notice him, where maybe he kind of got passed over being that East St. Louis kid who went to Mizzou and didn't have a huge freshman year, but hey man, he had a bust out sophomore season and was great until he got nicked up at the end of the year. He's a guy right on the outside of that top 5 for me.
Yeah, it's looking like it's going to be Carson Beck from everything I've seen and heard and spoken to people about. Carson Beck looks like he's going to be the starter there, and he's got the best arm that they've had since Jacob Eason, and that's going on 7-8 years ago. So he has a big arm. He has big time ability. He doesn't have the same type of wheels that Stetson Bennett had, but Carson Beck is definitely able to get the ball to those guys, him to Lovett and to Ra Thomas, who also transferred in from Mississippi State. Those are some big time guys there.
I do want you mentioned Franklin. I want to touch on him. I mean, the size is there at 6'3". As far as height, I do want him to possibly gain 15-20 pounds. He's a little bit undersized on the weight for me. But, I mean, this guy is an aggressive runner, and he is going back there with Bo Nix, and I do expect a big air season from Oregon this year, and Troy Franklin, being that recipient from Bo Nix mostly. Just an aggressive runner, knows how to pick up the yards in bunches, and he's focused when he goes up to attack the ball, to bring it down and catch it. So I'm very excited. I mean, you're going hands-on with USC. He's going to be facing this high-powered offense, UFC. You have Colorado coming in here with Shooter. The Pac-12 is really heating up to be these next guys as far as a great wide receiver team. And so I'm really paying attention to what he'll do against the secondary on teams, because I think he can explode off the top and just have a phenomenal year this year.
Yeah, and they brought in Tez Johnson also, who's Bo Nix's adopted brother. So those guys will obviously have chemistry, and Franklin and Bo Nix obviously have chemistry also from last season. So I think Oregon's in for a pretty solid year in the air. I saw a clip of Troy Franklin yesterday, and just his moves are filthy. Mm-hmm. He can break a defender down and just be gone in an instant.
Great.
Well, when we've talked about it in the past, it's kind of known all around. The Pac-12 is not known for their defense, and now they're finally getting high-end QB play and high-end wide receivers. I just have a feeling we're going to see a lot of fireworks in that Pac-12 this year. I think we're going to see a lot of games in the 60s and 50s out there. I mean, I love those West Coast games. I'm a guy. I own a couple bars and restaurants. I love to jump on at 9-10 o'clock at night and watch those West Coast games. I'm excited, with what they're doing in Colorado, Oregon, Arizona State, Arizona even. I mean, I just think you're going to see a lot of offensive football, and there's a lot of good young wide receiver talent all around the Pac-12. And I think they finally have the QBs to get all those guys the balls.
Don't forget at Washington with Rome Odunze and Jalen McMillan as well. Those guys can absolutely ball.
And I think that's a team that people forget about. Sometimes it's Washington. I mean, they're just not. They're off your radar. But man, that team, you're right. They're with Penix Jr. and everything. I mean, they are going to score a ton of points too this year. You never can leave out Washington State. They're going to bring the offense and Cam Ward there. So I like I said, I'm excited to watch some West Coast football this year. I think we're going to see a lot of stud kids that are going to have high Devy rankings. If they don't go high this year, they're going to be going really, really high next year.
Yep. There's another guy at Washington who just transferred in from Michigan State, Jeremy Bernard. He has a ton of talent and has really good size, can really run. He's the next guy after Odunze and McMillan. Those guys are going to be all three of those guys can be really, really special for them, especially with Michael Penix Jr. Throwing them the ball.
Yeah, anybody that's tuned into the Pac-12 games, I mean, knows Washington and Washington State. Any game, they always put up a tough game, and I think that's just to show their sleeper abilities. You like you mentioned, you forget about that team, but man, if you watch them, they're keeping toe to toe with the big guys, with your Oregon, with your USC. And sometimes it's looking like they may win, and then they just throw it out at the end, and just something happens or something goes wrong. But there are always some great athletes there, and Odunze is one of my sleepers for this class because I do expect a bigger season from him. He has a nice acceleration, knows how to get down the ball, but he's also fluid with his movement. So definitely someone I'm watching this year in Washington.
Yeah, you mentioned Arizona State, and they have a guy by the name of Elijah Badger that is going to dominate this year for them. And if somebody like Jordan Hudson transfers in there, they'll have a very dynamic 1-2 punch.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's move on to our 2025 ranking, shall we? Again, I'll start it off here. My number one guy in 2025 is Luther Burden out of Missouri. Number 2 is Evan Stewart out of Texas A&M. My number 3 guy is Adam Randall out of Clemson. My number 4 is Berrien Brown out of Kentucky, and my number 5 is Antonio Williams out of Clemson. Couple Clemson guys in there. They also have another guy who's actually draft eligible this year, Bo Collins. They should have a pretty dynamic wide receiver group for Kate Klubnik. A couple of really good running backs there also with Phil Maffa and Will Shipley. Pretty good tight end as well, Jake Brenningstool. And they've actually kind of transformed their offense a little bit to kind of run a little bit more like what TCU did last year and what Tennessee did last year as well. They brought in TCU's old offensive coordinator, and they're going to play a lot faster than what they have been supposedly. Supposedly they're going to. That's what that's kind of a quote that Kate Klubnik had, that they've been working on running faster, playing at a faster tempo. Berrien Brown, in my opinion, him and Dane Key at Kentucky are a really good combo for Devin Leary, who's transferring in from NC State. I think those two receivers have really special talent. Berrien Brown is one of those really dynamic type of guys. Very good returner as well. So I'm expecting big things out of Brown. Antonio Williams for Clemson also. My gosh, that guy catches almost everything, and Adam Randall is one of those kind of freak athletes that has big time potential. Evan Stewart for A&M is going to be a massive target hog this year. I know that they were expecting to bring in Tyron Smith out of UTEP, but it looks like he's actually going to return to UTEP. So Evan Stewart looks like he's going to be the guy that's going to be getting all the targets.
Yeah, Antonio Williams is my one. You hit it on the nail with him. Just a phenomenal athlete. He plays quick. He's not necessarily the fastest person on the field, but he can win those foot races, and he knows where the ball needs to be. So he knows how to properly adjust to get it. So I do like him and Adam Randall. My number 2 is Evan Stewart. Same reason for what you said. I just expect a huge target hog from him this year. He has some explosive speed and kind of that second gear where it looks like he may be slowing down, but then he just goes off to the races. Luther Burden is my number 3. I do have Dane Key, as you mentioned, from Kentucky. I fell in love with this guy his senior year of high school, so I got him in some C2C leagues last year and some of my Devy leagues. Just a freak athlete, 6'3", has phenomenal mental focus when he's going after the ball and even just running. I am, curious to see what he does this year after losing Will Levi to the draft this year. And then I actually have Squirrel Wright from Tennessee. You talked it all up with the quarterback there. I think Squirrel Wright can be that over-the-top wide receiver, kind of how Jalen Hyatt was this past year. So I think he's going to be the one that they're going to require or expect to take the top off the defenses, and we're going to see a lot of big plays from him this year.
The one thing that kind of scares me about Squirrel is he is severely undersized, extremely fast.
Mm-hmm.
One of the fastest guys in the country. He's going to have to put on a little bit of muscle and be able to maintain that type of speed in order to be effective at the next level. He's about 5'8", 5'9", and I think he may be listed at 5'10", but I don't think he's quite that tall. Especially whenever you see him next to guys who are legit 5'10". Squirrel may be closer to 5'9", but he's really slight, about 160. He needs to put on about 15, 20 pounds of muscle and maintain his speed and quickness and agility and ability to run away from people.
Right.
For my 2025 guys, like I talked about earlier, Luther Burden, I just think he's a guy that can do a little bit of everything, and I think Missouri's going to figure out a way to get him as many touches as possible this year. I can see his stats being through the roof this season, seeing everything he can do. Again, like you guys said, Evan Stewart, number 2 from Texas A&M, if they can keep that offense rolling, it just feels like he's a guy ready to just explode. Clemson, I just see a resurgence from them. I think Cade Klubnik getting a whole season as the starter, going in the offseason, knowing he's the man with all the wide receiver talent, I feel like it's a bounce back Clemson year. I think they've got all the offensive talent in the world. Will Shipley at running back as well. I think Antonio Williams, maybe a little bit down year last year compared to what people were hoping. That's just because that offense wasn't as good. But, man, I think he's a stud, and I think he's going to show it this year, along with a couple other guys, just kind of like what we talked about with USC and Ohio State, just so much talent there in the wide receiving core. I got Barry Brown from Kentucky, again, a guy I think Leary moving there, I think helps him a ton. I think Leary, got a little banged up at NC State last year. I actually think he's more talented than Will Levis. I'd rather have Leary personally as my QB. So I think it's an upgrade for Brown. I think he's going to be, like you said, with Key on the other side. It's not like he's the only guy Kentucky's got. So I think that helps him out a lot. And then I just think Matthew Golden, Houston, we've seen the offensive fireworks that they can show over the years. I just think he's the next guy in that line of Houston, SMU type receivers that you just go out there and all of a sudden he's putting up 115 catches, 1,500 yards. 16, 17 TDs. I just think he's that guy we're going to be talking about next year. Like, ooh, how high can this guy go with the stats he put up and show what he can do at Combine? I just think he's a guy that's going to get a lot more opportunities for people to see him this year too. With Houston changing conferences, I think he's going to be in some of those shootouts, and now people actually might get to see him. So he's my guy in there at number 5 for me. Again, another super talented class. A few other guys, kind of on my radar here is Andre Green, UNC, Akeem Williams, FSU, and a guy that I really like that maybe isn't as high as some people are is Kobe Prentice at Alabama. I just think he's got a shot. He played a decent amount as a true freshman last year and had some solid games. Nobody really took over. All those guys, Jacoby Brooks, some of those other guys, JoJo Earl, the guys they had in front of them saying they didn't really prove it last year. They're going to get a shot again this year. But I think one of the Alabama guys, if I'm in a Devy and he didn't go last year in one of my leagues, which there's a good chance he's probably out there, he's a guy I'm looking at a little bit later. I just think he has a shot to possibly end up being the number 1 on this Alabama offense. And everybody knows they just keep reloading every year. Great wide receivers, great QB play. They're obviously going to miss Bryce Young, but they've got some studs coming up as well. You think we'll be able to step in there. So he's one of those guys kind of on the outside looking in that I'm feeling like I can steal in some Devy drafts this year.
Yeah, that Alabama wide receiver room is so crowded with, you got Burton, you've got Brooks, you've got Prentice, you've got Isaiah Bond, you got Malik Benson coming in. It's just so, and then you got those 2 big time freshmen coming in as also. That group is ridiculously talented. It's just kind of trying to weed out who is going to get those targets. It's one thing to have an embarrassment of riches, but it's another thing to actually be able to get them a ball. There's only one ball out there, so who's going to be out there to catch it? All right, well, let's move on here to JT. Looks like you're on mute there. There you go.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just saying that's kind of why I like Prentice in that group. I feel like he's the guy that's kind of getting forgotten, and that's why I'm saying if you can maybe steal him a little later than other guys because that is such a crowded room and you don't know who's gonna kind of take over there. That's why I like him as a sneaky pick, just because he might be one of those guys that people are kind of forgetting about in that crowded room, and you can get him a little bit later. He's not a guy you're gonna have to take super early, but a sneaky end of the draft pick for me.
Sure, absolutely. All right, well, let's move on here to 2026, and we'll get that going on here. My top 5 for 2026. I know everybody's is going to be a little bit different here. Agree, disagree, whatever you want to do. But I've got my number 1 guy in this class is Mekhi Lemon out of Southern Cal. Super special athlete. He is going to be so dynamic there. My number 2 guy is Jonte Cook II out of Texas. If you watched that spring game at all, you were able to see how good he can be. Just so fast and able to take the top off, and he's already burning DBs who have been there for 2-3 years now. Jurion Dickey out of Oregon is my number 3 guy. Big receiver, is going to out physical everybody. He's the type of guy actually kind of reminds me of somebody like a David Boston. Do you guys remember him?
Yeah, man, this guy was just a physical wide receiver, just big. I mean, just pushing people around everywhere.
Yeah, just absolutely jacked. My number 4 guy, Zachariah Branch out of Southern Cal. Him and Lemon are going to be a dynamic duo there for the next couple years. After Caleb Williams leaves, it's going to be Malachi Nelson's job, and he has 2 absolute studs to work with Cook and Branch, and then a couple of those tight ends also coming in. My gosh. My number 5 guy, a lot of people have him a little bit further down. I've had the ability to actually see this guy play a little bit, just being a Tennessee fan. Saw him play a little bit in the spring game the other day. Nathan Leacock. He's got the size. He's got speed. He's got the ability to high point a ball. He can run away from a defender. He can out physical a defender. He can run whatever route you need him to run. I think he has the ability to be really, really special.
Oh, my 5, I mean, we have a lot of similarities there for him. My number 1 is Brandon Ennis, as I mentioned, just wide receiver. You go in there. I mean, this kid's an all-around natural athlete. His junior year, he put up over 600 passing yards. He put up over 300 rushing yards and over 300 receiving yards. Just an all-around natural athlete. I think they're going to use him and spread him around the ball, and he's just going to the ball out there. Again, wide receiver, I love it. I mean, one of my guys actually is one of the sleepers there that's also in the class, Noah Rogers, and I think they have Carnell Tate too. They got, like 3 out of the top 12, 10 wide receivers there. So, I mean, it's going to be phenomenal just seeing what OSU continues to do. Jonte Cook is my number 2. As you mentioned, I mean, he's freakishly fast. He's someone that's going to be great in Texas. He might get a chance this year with Quinn Ewers, but then you have Arch Manning there, and I love to see that pair and what they'll be able to do. Zachariah Branch is my number 3 there. He kind of reminds me of Garrett Wilson almost, honestly, just with how quick he is and how fast he can get that separation. He's one of those guys that he's not necessarily big, but he is very, very fast, and he will get that over the defenders. I think that's going to be very great for him at that next level. I do have Hakeem Williams at Florida State. Just a phenomenal athlete, too. He's a strong runner. He pushes through his defenders, and he has that second speed, and that's something you want to see in those wide receivers when they catch the ball. What are they doing after they catch the ball? Are they just getting tackled, or are they getting extra yards? And he's someone that sees the field and can explode down to get an extra 10, 15 yards. I do have Jerrion Dickey, the same reason, just a big boy. He's strong, upper body strength, but then when you look at his legs, man, he's kind of just like very agile, very light on his feet, and you love to see that in your wide receivers because it shows just how elusive he can move through the defenses, find his open zones, or just with how big he is, though, he's going to win those contested matches. So I am excited to see what he can do as well, and just a big threat. If you haven't noticed, I'm a fan of the bigger wide receivers, and I think this class has a lot of guys that are just going to ball over these DBs, and it's going to be a hard time being a defensive back.
Well, these wide receivers in this class are absolutely phenomenal. It may be the deepest class of wide receivers I've ever seen. In spirit of transparency, my 6, 7, 8 guys are those three Buckeye wide receivers: Enos, Tate, and Rogers. Problem is, with them going to the same place, I have no idea exactly how to rank them. Right. Just because I want to see them out on the field. I want to see what they're able to do. Carnell Tate absolutely took over in the spring this year. I want to see what Enos and Rogers can do also. So I had a little bit of a harder time kind of ranking them based off I want to see how they're used. I want to see what they can do on the field together with those big time quarterbacks that they also got. And then my 9 guy is Hakeem Williams out of Florida State. Kind of a big dude, can run. He actually kind of reminds me of who was the wide receiver Florida State had several years ago, played for Carolina. Kelvin Benjamin.
Yeah.
Kind of reminds me of him a little bit. He's more fluid. Benjamin was kind of stiff, but Williams can run a little bit better than that, is more fluid. But he kind of reminds me of that, just kind of the way he plays.
Well, what I really like about this wide receiver class is they all seem very mentally focused when they're going after the ball, and you're starting to see, I don't know if it's just the age we're in where it's kind of aired out offenses, but you're starting to see a lot of smarter wide receivers come into the game where they're not losing the focus at any time they're in the ball. They know where to track the ball. They know how to properly go up for the catch to bring it down over the defenders. And we're seeing that with these guys, and it's coming with their strength and their size, but that huge part of awareness is there too. And you're seeing that with the vision they have with the open field in front of them. They know where they need to go to avoid the defenders, or they're quick and they just know how to make the right moves to make the defender miss as well.
Well, a lot of that comes with just always playing 7-on-7 in the off season and just always refining your skills.
Yeah, I was going to say that. I just think the way these offenses are created now in high school, they're coming out playing 7-on-7 all the time. They're coming out throwing the football. Guys are playing wide receiver their whole career now, where I think you look at the 90s, you had a ton of these guys playing running back and quarterback at their high schools. They're really probably suited to be wide receivers in the college and the NFL, but they're going to play their studs wherever they can play them. And now you're seeing these guys go to schools with other kids that are studs, and you don't have that one kid who has to do everything on your team. And that's where I think Ennis is one of the guys that's the most intriguing in this class, because he was kind of the old school guy that he was playing QB, he was playing running back, he's playing wide receiver. It's going to be interesting to see how he develops and takes that next big step at Ohio State now that he's only playing wide receiver, and he's got all these other stud wide receivers around to learn from. That's why I think his ceiling is super high. Plus, you got to love a kid that just played wherever their coaches need him to play and didn't worry about exactly, well, I'm a wideout coach, I'm only going to play wide receiver. So I like him a lot, and I think that's why we're actually seeing such deep classes now. Is all these guys are playing 7-on-7 all year. They're playing with stud quarter. They're playing in high school systems that want to air it out, as opposed to everybody, 80s and 90s. Let's pound the rock. Let's put everybody in run let's run option everywhere. Let's run wristbone. Let's run eye. You got to see a lot of stud athletes who just never really got to show themselves in high school and college because they just didn't get them the football. I mean, I think you think of Calvin Johnson, a guy where if Calvin Johnson came out now, oh my goodness, we'd be losing our mind. He's a guy's an absolute stud, but just got very few opportunities to prove himself. These kids are getting a chance to prove themselves early, and that's why I think we're seeing better wide receiver play, because they're coming in ready. These guys don't need 2-3 years to sit. They're coming in ready to play. They're playing these type of concepts all of high school now. And I think that's why they're ready to come in, and because they know they're a wide receiver, there's no doubt. I just think that they're more prepared to come to that level and play at that level. So same for me. I'm right the same line with you guys. Very similar guys. I mean, I've got Branch, Lemon, Ennis, Cook, and Dickey as my top 5. But this is deep class. I mean, you're looking at 10, 15, 20 guys pretty easily that could show out even as freshmen. Or guys you can talk about, Ennis is one of those guys, depending on how he plays this season, even if he doesn't get a ton of reps, he could be that Marvin Harrison role where you say, man, he had some good games as a freshman. And then, bam, sophomore year, he comes out and you're like, oh, this is the man. This is the man. And so some of these guys, you're going to have to get on a little early, because if you wait till next year, you might be 1 year too late on them in order to hit them at their prime before you're paying through the nose for them.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and dive into some of our sleepers here. Just to kind of get it moving along here. My 2024 sleepers. I'm actually really big on Donovan Green out of Wake Forest. Dave Clawson actually said prior to last season that Green is probably the most talented wide receiver he's ever coached at Wake Forest. That's pretty high praise, considering they also had A.T. Perry last year. They've had a couple other, pretty big time wide receivers there also. I'm pretty high on Brew McCoy. I think he's a pretty special wide receiver. He's not overly fast, but he's big and physical. He can move. He can adjust to a ball. He's got really strong hands. He can go up and high point a ball. You really saw that towards the end of that Alabama game last year, where he just went and snatched the ball out from underneath an Alabama defender that got Tennessee into a field goal position. That was an amazing throw and an amazing catch. Another guy I really like is Johnny Wilson out of Florida State. Real big, tall wide receiver. They really like those types of guys there down in Tallahassee. He's another guy who's kind of really just a matchup nightmare. He's so tall. What is he, like 6'6", 6'7", something crazy like that? He's a matchup nightmare, and it's just gonna you just throw it up to him, he's gonna catch it over anybody. Another guy I actually really like, if he can stay healthy, that's been his problem, is Julian Fleming. His issue hasn't been talent. His issue is being able to stay on the field because of his health. And when last year when he was healthy, he was really, really good. Put up some really nice numbers whenever he was healthy, and then he had some health issues again that have been flaring up throughout his entire career there. I think he has the ability to kind of be a sleeper guy going into next year's draft.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. You mentioned Johnny Wilson. I mean, this guy's 6'7". I forgot which game I was watching, but the announcer's like, man, when you have a 6'7" guy run like a deer, you got to throw it up to him. I mean, this guy just flies across. He's quick. He's strong. He knows what he needs to do. Mario Williams, we already touched on him a little bit, but definitely one of the sleepers between him and Brendan Rice and the other guys. You can't go wrong with Caleb Williams or Malachi Nelson as your quarterback there. One guy I do want to touch on, and I've been beating this drum, since last year, is a transfer going to Virginia Tech, and that's Ollie Jennings. I think that's an upgrade for Grant Wells and an upgrade for him at quarterback. Just a phenomenal athlete. He's not the fastest on the field, but he has a great IQ, what he needs to do to get to the ball. I think there was one stretch last year where he had 7 weeks of catching a touchdown just back to back to back. I mean, he's definitely an end zone threat for a quarterback, and I definitely expect this to be his best season. And I thought he was going to come out this year, and then I saw he transferred. So, I mean, he's definitely one of my guys this year out at Virginia Tech, Ollie Jennings.
Well, Jennings transferring in from Old Dominion to Virginia Tech is a big step up for him. I really want to see what he does moving into the Power 5.
Right.
Yeah, I'm interested in, like I said, a lot of the same guys you talked about. I already kind of talked about a little bit. Dominic Leavitt for Georgia. He's a guy. I'm looking at the wide receivers out there in Arizona. Cowings. A few of the other studs they got. I just think Arizona's got some guys going up. And one of the ones I'm looking at is North Carolina. Who's going to be that next guy for North Carolina? They got Drake May. He's going to be slinging it. Who's going to become his new favorite? And whoever that guy becomes, I want that guy. So it could be a number of different guys, but that's definitely another class I'm looking at. And, we're going to see some guys pop on some teams that maybe, we didn't know about last year. I mean, Purdue's another one of those programs. They always seem to have a guy that comes out and really just shows out. Who is that going to be for them in that offense this year? Charlie Jones came out of nowhere last year for them and just put up a monster year. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see where some of these programs have been, where some of these guys who maybe aren't in these top, like 10, 15 programs, get some of these outside guys to kind of see what they can do. There's just some high-powered offenses out there. Zachariah Franklin from Texas San Antonio. I mean, he's a guy I thought might come out this year, decided to go back, got his quarterback back. I mean, they're a CFF monster out there, and it'd be interesting to see if he can kind of raise his stock as far as Devy for the NFL this year with another big year out there. So he's a guy also I'm kind of keeping an eye on. He's a guy I liked last year, and him going back, I think, is going to give him another chance to kind of really prove himself to NFL scouts.
Yeah, you mentioned Franklin there. They have a trio of guys who are just really, really good. You got Franklin, you got Joshua Cephas, and you got DeCorian Clark. All three of those guys can go up and get it. They can torch anybody. Frank Harris has a ton of weapons there in San Antonio to work with, and I'll actually get to see them up close and personal because they're coming to Knoxville to play.
Oh, that would be a fun game. Well, I didn't even realize that one was on the schedule. I got to mark that one on my calendar. Make sure I get that channel somewhere so I can watch it because man, there should be some offense in that one.
Oh yeah. It's gonna be a big. It's gonna be a big time test. There's gonna be some big time points scored in that one. All right. Well, let's get on to our 2025 sleepers here. I've got Andre Green Jr. out of North Carolina, Chris Marshall out of Ole Miss. He transferred in from A&M, and then a guy that you had already mentioned, Matthew Golden out of Houston. I really want to see what Matthew Golden does now that Houston's going to be playing a Power 5 schedule. Is that just a system that puts up a lot of points, or is it just good wide receivers who play there? Because Tank Dell has been there the last couple of years. He's been a big-time guy. It's going to be Matthew Golden's turn now. Chris Marshall got into some trouble at A&M, but he was a 5-star receiver coming out of high school. Pairing him with Trey Harris in Oxford, that's going to be a pretty good wide receiver duo there, especially in Lane Kiffin's offense. And then Andre Green Jr., I think, has a lot of talent. I don't necessarily know that it's going to be shown this season at North Carolina because you got Devontae Walker and Nate McCullum who have transferred in. Those are going to be pretty big-time guys for Drake May. Also, Kobe Paysor is also there. And I want to see Andre Green carve out a role this year and then explode next year. I think that's where I want to see his progression. He didn't get a whole lot of play last year. This year I want to see him carve out a role. Next season I want to see him explode.
Yeah, we do. You talk
about Trey Martin at Ole Miss. Oh, sorry about that. Talk about Trey Martin at Ole Miss. He's a guy that I'm interested to put in really good numbers at Louisiana Tech. Is, again, like you talked about, is that a system thing? Is it, playing against, worse competition? Is he a guy that can make that leap to Ole Miss and a really good offense and show out? So he's a guy I'm definitely interested to see, kind of like you talked about with Golden. Can they make that transition to playing tougher competition and still put up those stud stats, look really good against high-end corners? So he's definitely a guy that I'm glad you brought up because he's somebody I'm kind of keeping an eye on as well.
Yeah, we same thing with Chris Marshall. Coming out, he looked great, and I think sometimes that change of scenery does help him. So I'm expecting to see a lot from him. One guy I do want to bring up is I'm probably gonna butcher his name, but Tetairoa McMillan out in Arizona. And I want to compare him to kind of Raheem Jarrett because I feel Raheem Jarrett is one of the wide receivers that's been slept on this year. But don't let that bad quarterback play have you sleep on these wide receivers. This is a phenomenal talent out in Arizona, and he has great speed. He has phenomenal catch radius. You see him going out and catching the one-handed or having to step back just because he's being underthrown. So definitely a talent there that you want to watch. And again, don't sleep on it if the quarterback play is bad there because he is someone that could climb some boards. I also have Darius Clemens from Michigan. Just a giant there. I think he's staying 6'6", 6'7" as well. The speed's not there, but man, he can be a deep threat. He could be someone that, just a friendly to any quarterback because he's so tall and he doesn't necessarily need to jump to just get the ball, but he's a matchup nightmare. And I think we could see some big things from him out of Michigan as well.
Well, with Tet McMillan, I really hope he's more consistent than what Rack Jarrett was at Maryland, just because Jarrett had the opportunity 2 seasons ago to be the guy. And whenever Demas got hurt, and he just never really took over that role. I know McMillan this year is not really going to have that number one receiver role either, just because Cowing is there. But again, with him, I want to see him take the next step and then explode next year when Cowing is gone. Singer is no longer there. He's transferred to Southern Cal. So that number 2 wide receiver spot should be wide open for McMillan to take over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I think this is that year where we can see that again, just, to build off of what he did last year and just his phenomenal catch radius and that speed. I don't necessarily expect a blow up season by any means, but I do expect some progression coming in this year for him to at least start getting him on your radars. He's probably in your C2C leagues right now and your Devy drafts, and for a Devy draft, I probably necessarily would take him, but in your C2Cs, I mean, that's someone that I definitely want on my bench for the rotation, to have for that wide receiver room.
Absolutely. How about you, JT? What type of sleepers you got here in 2025?
Yeah, I talked about it briefly. Was Kobe Prentice is a guy I like. Just like I said, I think he's a guy's got a lot of upside, crowded room, but he's somebody I'm looking at. Like you said, Andre Green. I like him. North Carolina, I just think he's got a shot to kind of go out and make some big plays there. You guys talked about a lot of the guys I like already in this group. I always think this is kind of that weird area of sleepers. You get those guys that are sophomores coming in either redshirted or played sparingly. And it's like, okay, we're real hyped on them coming out as freshmen, freshman year coming in. Now, who's those guys that kind of separate themselves? Where are those guys that kind of jump up after they got that next year? And I always think these are the guys you want to kind of jump on if you can, especially if you're in a C2C or CFF league and you got a couple waiver wire pickups. If you could, keep an eye out for some of those guys early on in the season, kind of jump in there, grab one of those guys kind of before he gets away next season and ends up being a really high pick. I think this is the kind of spot you really want to look for those guys and try to get them before they really hit.
Yep. I know a lot of people are a lot of people like to track Dominator age, and they also like to track what type of freshman productivity guys have had. That's not necessarily overly indicative of how they can play moving past their freshman year. Some guys just don't get the opportunity. I mean, you look at TCU with DJ Allen and Jordan Hudson. Hudson has entered the transfer portal. Looks like he's looking at places like SMU and Arizona State. DJ Allen, he was another kind of one of those high 4-star, borderline 5-star type wide receivers, and he didn't get any play last year. That doesn't mean he's not good. That just means they had other guys in front of him that they trusted in that system, because I've mentioned this on other forums that these kind of high up-tempo offenses, it's a little difficult for some of these wide receivers to come in and play right away, because they're having to look at different reads. They're having to look at coverages. They have option routes based off everything that they're seeing out there. So sometimes those take a while to adjust to. So don't sleep on some of these freshmen who didn't do a lot last year. They can still have productive careers and be NFL guys.
Well, he's mentioned, with this class, especially just being so deep. I mean, or you mentioned earlier, the wide receiver room in any draft is always the deepest room, right? So there's always guys that, they might not get their opportunity, but JT's been saying, you want to grab them before they're hot, before their price goes up, so you have them on your team. And then guess what? If you need to go trade for a solid running back, you can be like, look, I got this guy that he's blowing up now, so you definitely want to be able to grab those. And if you can have a deep wide receiver room, that's always helpful. Just like you have your wide receivers, you in Ohio State, LSU, Alabama, they cycle through these guys, and it's not, the freshmen coming in aren't getting PT, but it's because that's just how good their wide receiver room is. They don't need to give them PT, but guess what? When it's their time, they're going to be just as good as the ones that just went ahead of them.
Yeah, not everybody's Devontae Smith coming in and catching a touchdown to win the national title game. Right. That's very rare. Not everybody's Rondale Moore just dominating as a freshman wide receiver. That's very rare that happens. Don't lose sight of these guys just because they don't put up production in their first year in a system. It's not a typical thing that you have an 18-year-old kid come in and just completely take over a wide receiver room. You have that on occasion, but it's not typical.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think the good example is Marvin Harrison. I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr. came in. You knew he was talented. You just didn't know how much. And with the guys in front of him, with them kind of sitting at the end of the year, that's freshman year, and he got a chance to play in the Rose Bowl, and JSN had the monster game. I mean, the game of all games. But Marvin Harrison was really good down the stretch, and he's one of those guys. Did I think he was going to be the number one guy? No. But I was like, this guy's got all the potential, and he was the guy I was pushing for last year going, hey, you might want to get in on him now, because you give him another year, it might be too late, and it ended up being that way, where if you didn't get him last year in a Devy, you're giving up a ton to get him this year, even if you're in a startup. I mean, we did a startup, for our IDP league not too long ago, and man, he went second round of a startup. I mean, he was out there. So, again, these guys, sometimes you want to look at those guys that you maybe didn't have that huge freshman year, but showed some upside, or some of those guys, like an Ennis, he might be one of those guys going not this year, but next year, the year after, is where you really want to jump on him and grab him in leagues, because maybe he doesn't get a lot of PT as a freshman. But, man, when those guys go to the NFL, he's going to have a spot wide open to come in and perform. So that's one of those things I think you always got to keep your eye out and don't look past the guy just because he didn't get a ton of PT, especially when you're looking at the guys in front of him are absolute studs. Sometimes it just takes a minute for you to get up there and earn your spot, even though you have the talent. So just don't look past those guys. Just be like you said, Tommy, don't look past guys just because they didn't have a huge dominator in freshman year.
Yeah, absolutely. Places like Ohio State, who are going to have 10 receivers who will end up playing in the NFL, it's really hard for a freshman to come in and take over any type of snaps there. I mean, at Ohio State, coming out of high school, Emeka Egbuka was more highly ranked than what Marvin Harrison Jr. was. And then in their freshman year, neither one of them really got a whole lot of run. And then last year is when they took over. It's going to be the same way for guys like at Ohio State. You got Jaden Ballard, you got Kyon Grays, you got Caleb Burton, and then you're bringing in those three stud freshmen also. Then there's another guy, Kofi Antwi is also another stud receiver that they brought in last year as a freshman. So they have tons of wide receivers there. So just because a guy doesn't get a whole lot of play as a freshman doesn't mean he's not good. It just means he has to wait for his opportunity.
Yeah, and going over them, I know I have Brandon Ennis as my one in that class, but I mean, if I can get either Brandon Ennis, Rogers, or Tate, from this Ohio State class, I'm happy with that.
Absolutely.
I'm not necessarily going over to get one of these guys, because I'm okay if I get Noah Rogers later, or Carnell Tate later, or even Ennis later. So if those two go above him, so I mean, I think it's a fun class with Ohio State specifically, just to cycle through. And as you mentioned earlier, you didn't really know where to put them on your rankings, because they are all very similar in how they play and how they can make improvements for that team. So it's just exciting to see what they'll be able to do for them.
Absolutely. Let's get into our 2026 sleepers. I've got Trishawn Lyons for Washington, Chris Culliver out of North Carolina, and you'll like this one. I got Joshua Manning out of Missouri. I think all three of those guys have a really good skill set. I think that all three need to put on some good muscle and maintain their ability to separate from defenders at the same time. Lyons is really skinny, but in that Washington offense, he's going to be super dynamic here in a maybe not. It probably won't be this year, but you may see him a little bit next year. Joshua Manning, kind of the same way. You may not see him a whole lot this year, but next year is probably going to be a pretty big season for him. And then Culliver, again, it won't be this year. Next year, though, is when you're going to be kind of looking for him to kind of carve out a role.
Yeah. So I know Rogers and Tate just because I didn't have them in my top five, but there are definitely some. I like Malachi Coleman out in Nebraska. He was a two-way player in high school. He played defensive end, I believe, and wide receiver. But, I mean, when you look at that, it's like, okay, how does that make sense, right? Defensive end and wide receiver, those are like two completely. It's not defensive back wide receiver, as Jerrion Dickey was in high school as well. But he's someone that it has that upper body strength, and he knows where he needs to be. As I mentioned, that breakaway speed and that awareness are key in these freshmen, and you're seeing it a lot more. But this guy's a giant. He's like 6'4", 6'3". He is just under 200, but I expect to see big things from him at Nebraska. And I also like Jalen Hall out of Alabama, just a star receiver that, has that straight line speed, could definitely be a deep threat. He's about 6'1" and has some beautiful hands, where he has a nice catch radius, and he can catch the ball wherever it's at. And definitely a playmaker. Once he gets that ball in his hands, he will adjust accordingly to make sure there's no defenders around him, or if there is, he's making sure they're 5 feet away from him as soon as he catches that ball.
Yeah, for me, it's a lot of the same guys that we kind of talked about. And, I'm always, like we just said, kind of go back to these factories. Ohio State, Cornell Tate, Jalen Hale, Alabama, DeAndre Moore Jr., Texas. Get some of these guys. They might not do much for you this year, but they're guys that are the easiest to take huge leaps a year or two down the road. So if I'm going into a year where I'm drafting in a Devy league and I'm saying, okay, all the top-end guys are off the board, everybody's hit up these first 4 or 5 or 6 freshmen that they love. Who are the next guys on the list for me that I can get a little bit farther down my draft? And that's where I want to be looking. I want to be looking, all right, that crowded Alabama room, that crowded Texas room, that crowded Ohio State room. And like you said, SC earlier, I want one of those guys. Give me one of the 3 Ohio State guys. Give me 1 or 2 of the Alabama guys, because some of those guys are going to break out, and you're never sure which one it is. So that's what I always think about when I'm kind of grabbing these freshman guys that are out, maybe outside the top 5 or right on the fringe of that top 10, 12. There's some of the guys that maybe are getting forgotten about, or you can get a little bit later in these Devy drafts. And so that's kind of what I want to look at, because, again, whenever you're drafting freshmen, that it's a little bit of a risk. You just aren't sure how those guys are going to develop in college, what they're going to do. But I think it's less of a risk these days if you get these high-end guys at the right schools who their coaches know how to coach and have proven to get these guys to the next level. And so that's what I want to kind of lean on when there's so much unknown. I'm going for the coaching staffs and the programs that are putting out NFL players.
Sure. Absolutely. Another guy I didn't mention that I'm really, really high on as an incoming freshman is Shelton Sampson Jr. out of LSU. That guy is, if you go and watch his clips, he's a tall receiver. He runs like a deer. He goes up and catches everything. He's got a massive catch radius, and LSU is known for just pumping out wide receivers, and he is going to be one of the next in line. Speaking of LSU receivers and being next in line, let's start talking about Malik Nabers here. That right there is what you call a transition, folks, and we are going to discuss what Nabers can do here. And I've actually been really high on him since the end of last season. Like we've talked about, LSU, like Alabama and Ohio State, they pump out NFL wide receivers, guys like Jarvis Landry, Odell Beckham Jr., Justin Jefferson, and Jamar Chase. They've been dominant in the NFL for several years now. Going into last season, Keyshawn Boutte was supposed to be the next guy. That changed a little bit, though. Last season, Malik Nabers was supposed to compete for that wide receiver 2 job down in Baton Rouge, but he clearly outshined Boutte, who was actually thought to be a preseason contender to be an All-American and a potential first-round draft pick. After Keyshawn Boutte missed a substantial amount of the offseason and had a slow start, Nabers became that number 1 option for LSU. Finishing the season with 72 catches, over 1,000 yards, and 3 touchdowns. The touchdowns were a little bit down. I think that will have an uptick this year, just because the offense is clicking more, and it clicked more towards the end of the year, middle towards the end. They had a real slow start, but Nabers shot up Devy rankings, mine included, and he's now attempting to be a first or second round draft pick in next year's draft. His ability to be effective in all levels makes him truly dynamic. He's fast and elusive enough to jet past defenders, but he's also strong and physical enough to run contested short routes. He's not Marvin Harrison Jr., but he does have the ability. He does have the tools and ability to be a very dependable NFL wide receiver and a solid Devy asset. I would like to see him be more productive against better competition, like against Alabama, like against some of these bigger teams he plays against. But he's a very solid wide receiver, puts up good numbers. I want to see him do it against the better competition, though.
Yeah, I mean, everything you said about him is spot on. Definitely going to be a solid asset, and definitely someone that's climbing the Devy ranks, especially after we saw, before the last year even started, like Kayson Butte was arguably some of people's wide receivers ones, going into it, and all this stuff happened. Off the field issues, whatever it may be, and Malik Nabers definitely took that spotlight to say, okay, maybe this is my time. He's a quick athlete, nice straight line speed. He is a little bit stiff in the route running, so I do want to see a little bit more fluidity in him. But I think he's definitely a great wide receiver to be aggressive at the catch and then make the plays after the ball is in his hands. And that's what you want to see if he's not going to be an aired out, 50, 60-yard touchdown. I want to see what he can do within those 10 to 15 yards, catch the ball, and then the plays after. I think this is, his year to shine. This is his year where he can easily jump up the ranks and be right behind you, Marvin Harrison Jr., or even be that one. I mean, because you're in the SEC. If any wide receiver in the SEC goes out and dominates, SEC is known for their defenses outside of every Power 5. So any wide receiver that goes in there and just has a studded year can easily jump up and be that wide receiver one, and we could see that from Malik Nabers.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you guys on that. I like Nabers a lot. I think he showed that he's got that potential last year. Now it's just time to put it home, time to have a huge year, a dominant year. I think if he goes out and does what we think he can do, I think he's a first-round pick. I think he has a shot to be one of the top 5 wide receivers in next year's draft. I think he can be as high as number 3 in the draft. And I think if you're the top 5, you're going to be talked about as a first-round potential. So I think he's got that ability. And I think last year showed he was getting there. Now it's time to show he's ready to take over. And I think if he does, I think you're going to see a lot of talk about Nabers in the upcoming year.
Absolutely. He had a little bit of trouble this off season with an illegal carry charge that ended up getting dropped. I don't think NFL teams will really steer away from him too much because of that, especially since charges have been dropped. He just kind of has to be a little bit more careful and make sure he stays out of the news and out of trouble. Not to say that he has any type of propensity for that, but once you've been arrested once, that's always going to be looked at. Just kind of stay out of trouble, stay clear of those types of situations, and I think he'll be just fine.
Agreed.
Well, that's going to wrap up tonight's show, guys. Really, really solid show. Really enjoyed talking wide receivers. I think there's so many more wide receivers out there that we could discuss. If you guys want more content, go to DevyProsFootball.com. We're always putting out stuff. We have our Devy rankings up there. Make sure you go by there. Also, if you haven't done it already, hit the thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube page here. That's going to do it for this week's show. For SC and JT, I'm Tommy Harvey. We'll see you next time.